Legend of Total War here, and today we'll be doing another Legendary Lord power comparison video, this time covering the High Elves. I'll be covering all 6 of their Legendary Lords, starting with the least good Legendary Lord, moving on to the best one, and giving them a rating between 1 and 10 on 3 different categories. But before we get started on that, this video is sponsored by Manscaped, and they're all about keeping your balls looking nice. Now, if any of you guys know exactly what I'm like, you'll know that I'm a bit of a grub. Keeping myself looking nice in general is not really something that I put a lot of effort into.
Make all these stinking reptiles die!
But, you know, they sent me the Lawnmower 3.0, and I gave it a shot. And you know what? I'll just be perfectly honest with you. Whether it's completely unkempt or looking real nice, I don't give a crap. It doesn't impact on my comfort level at all. But you know what? It's not all about me. Somebody else gets a chance to, I guess, enjoy a more clean package down there. So rather than just have me talk about this product, I thought I'd actually talk to my wife about it. So what did you think about the whole Manscaped experience?
Well, this is very exciting for me because, as you guys have probably seen, he's a pretty hairy boy. You know, head to toe, let's just say. And so to see things a little bit more neat and kempt and smelling nice is not something I'm going to complain about.
I think the emphasis really needs to be put onto smelling nice.
Yeah, sometimes I walk into the studio and there is a stank.
I actually quite enjoy the stank though. So
I just avoid coming in here.
Yeah, see, that's what I like about the stank. It's like me zone. But like I said, the
like
product's
a wife
not
repellent.
Yeah, sort of.
Masterful scheme. Yes.
But it's not all about me. So what did you think?
Well, seeing things all trimmed and nicely kempt down there, should we give it a rating out of 10 since that's what we're doing in this video?
Well, I guess it's only fair. I mean, we're going to be rating 6 High Elf Legendary Lord pretty boys, essentially, and girls. So I guess it's only fair. If you want to give it a rating, go for it.
Well, this is the first time I've ever seen you like this, so I'm going to give it a full 10 out of 10 legendary ball grooming.
Well, there you go. And I guess if, you know, like I said, I don't personally care what my balls look like. You know, as long as it's comfortable down there for me, you know, I don't give a shit. So using the Lawnmower 3.0 was actually pretty easy, especially with the light, because it actually gets pretty dark down there when you're bending over and looking at stuff, and there's things in there, and just having a bit of light down there actually really helped. And it was definitely very waterproof because, you know, I was doing it in the shower, and you know, it does what it says it's supposed to do.
And there was no accidents?
No accidents, no blood was spilled. So that was also a big plus for me because my balls be wrinkly. You know, there's opportunities for accidents. So anyway, guys, if you've liked what you've heard here, or better still, if your missus has liked what they've heard here, you should check out Manscaped with a link down below. You can get 20% off and free shipping with the code LOTW20 at manscaped.com.
Be a Sigvold, not a Throg.
That's something I can definitely endorse. Definitely don't be a Throg in any way, shape, or form. Ever. Fuck Throg. Anyway, let's get on with the power comparison now. Coming in at number 6 is Teclis. Now, just because Teclis is coming down the bottom of this list doesn't mean that he's a bad Legendary Lord. He's kind of like the worst of the best. High Elves are arguably the most powerful Legendary Lords in the game, and, you know, Teclis is just at the bottom of this list. That doesn't mean he's a bad Legendary Lord, though. So, firstly, let's talk about his battle power. So, I don't want to go through everything in his list, but arguably, Teclis is one of the best spellcasters in the game, if not the best. So, just looking at some of the basic stuff, straight away his trait, Preeminent Mage, gives him 30 extra Winds of Magic reserve right at the beginning, and he gets 4 free casts of Fireball. He's also got, over here, additional 2 casts of Fireball, and 2 free casts for Fiery Convocation. Now, Teclis is a master of essentially all the High Elf Winds of Magic. Now, if you were to put every single spell from all of those Winds of Magic in his skill tree, that'd be ridiculous. So what sort of like has done to compensate for that is that he's got a mix of good spells from some of the laws of magic, and he's got the passives from all of them. Hang on, from all of them, because there's 9 here, and then you get to Manifold Sorcery. These are all the passive. Every time you cast, all of these will be applied. So as for the spells that you should focus on, that actually cost Winds of Magic to cast, I would go with Net of Amantok if you intend to go with a archer-based army, because it's super good for archers to lock down the enemy before they actually get able to get into melee with you. So Net of Amantok. Chain Lightning, he's arguably the best caster of Chain Lightning in the game, and I'll get onto that in just a moment, and Regrowth. As for the other spells, I wouldn't really bother with them. It's just, you're going to have limited points, and these ones here just don't really have as much impact as these other ones here. So as for Chain Lightning, Teclis is in a unique position that he's actually able to cast Chain Lightning essentially non-stop. He can cast it cheaper than any Legendary Lord in the game, because of Manifold Sorcery will reduce his Winds of Magic cost for all spells, and then his Sword of Teclis will reduce it by an additional 3, so he'll end up casting it super cheap, but he can also cast it constantly. So if you have a look there, it says cooldown minus 50%, but then over here you've got minus 20%, and then an additional 30% here, and that equals 100%. So every single spell that you don't overcast can be cast consistently, which includes Net of Amantok, but not if you overcast it, because if you overcast it, there's like a separate cooldown, and you'll notice that if you try to overcast it directly after it's finished with its original spell, you won't be able to select it. You have to wait like an additional 10 seconds, so I don't know if that's a bug or whatever. But yeah, if you single cast it, you'll be able to keep casting it over and over again, after the effect is worn out. So that's really effective for Teclis to be able to not only have cheap spells, but to just keep casting. But that also kind of makes him quite micro-intensive, but not in a bad way. So if you add up all of that, he's just basically just casting like crazy throughout the battle. And then to add on to a little bit of extra, he's got an Arcane Phoenix mount, which makes him actually pretty good in melee, because most supreme spellcasters, with a few exceptions, are not very good in melee, but Teclis actually isn't too bad. And he's got 2 kinds of Arcane Conduits, where he's got the Sword of Teclis Arcane Conduit, and then Greater Arcane Conduit, which is, constantly active. So Teclis is going to generate probably more magic than anyone else in the game, and, have a really good skill list of spells. So that's why he's getting the 10 out of 10 there. He's got really good equipment, really good spells, really good passives. He's going to be inflicting a lot of damage in most of the battles, or at least providing a lot of help with Net of Amantok and Regrowth for other people to do the work for him. Now, as for his command power, this is where he starts to fall down a little bit. He's only going to get a 6 out of 10 out of this, because he doesn't really have that much going for him. If we have a look at Glamour of Hoeth, he's able to provide a very small buff in a small area, plus 200% charge resistant, plus 4 leadership. So that's good for his frontline units, but for the most part, I really wouldn't add much points onto that. He also reduces upkeep of his army by 5% because of the Sword of Teclis. So yeah, he's only going to get a 6 out of 10 for that. That's basically all he does to boost his army, which isn't bad, but it's not that much. When compared to the other guys in this list, he doesn't do a whole lot. Now, as for his faction power, he's also going to get a 6 out of 10. Because, let's see, the War Crown of Safari, it increases your capacity and recruit rank for mages. And the Master of the Order gives ward save for all Lord Masters of Hoeth and for mages. And that's basically all he does. It's not bad, but it's just not a lot. Especially when we start looking at the people at the sort of the top of this list, it's not that much by comparison. So overall, Teclis is going to get a 7.3 out of 10, and it doesn't make him a bad Legendary Lord. Essentially, he's sort of like the highest ranked bottom of the list dude so far of these Legendary Lord comparison videos. Now let's move on to number 5. Coming in at number 5 is Eltharion. So Eltharion's going to get a 10 out of 10 for battle power, because he's essentially a 7 out of 10 melee combatant and a 3 out of 10 spellcaster, giving him the full 10 out of 10. Because I'm not going to average that out, because you can use them both simultaneously. In terms of melee combatant, he's about on par with Karl Franz. He's got some good base stats on foot. He's got Disability here, which is a passive, which will hurt nearby infantry, whether he's sort of tanking them, which, you know, it does a little bit of damage. It's nothing to really hone in on. And then he's got Stormwing, which, you know, puts him on a Griffin mount, which I said is about on par with Karl Franz. But then what really gives him the extra points is his Winds of Magic, especially in the early game. Getting access to Apotheosis early, which is a really good heal spell, he's able to basically keep himself nice and healthy, which is especially useful for his ability here, Grim Discipline. As long as he's above 25% health, he's able to basically be a much better melee fighter, which will probably give him the edge over, say, someone like Karl Franz. And then later on in the campaign, which I do recommend doing this, getting Fiery Convocation is a very good damage inflicting spell, and then getting to Arcane Conduit. But in order to get past Evasion, you do need to get the Talisman of Hoeth, which isn't difficult to get, so that shouldn't be a problem. As for the Hand of Glory, I don't really value that spell very highly. You can essentially cast it for like 2 Winds of Magic, which that's cheap. But the problem with this is that it only affects 1 unit, so, you know, improving the reload skill of one of your archer units, even for 2 Winds of Magic, I'm like, I don't know if it's even worth a click, because battles happen quite quickly. But, you know, you can do it, but I'd much prefer to do something like this. Try to get them into a position where I can kill like a couple of 100 units with Fiery Convocation, rather than focusing on constantly doing this every few seconds. That's my personal opinion. So yeah, adding up his melee skills and his magic skills, he's going to get a 10 out of 10 for that. Now, as for his command skills, he's also going to get a 10 out of 10. Now, Eltharion is arguably the best archer commander in the game, because High Elves have some of the best archer units in the game, and Eltharion boosts them the most out of anyone because of one particular skill, Break Upon the Walls, giving unending volley for missile units, allowing them to regenerate their ammo at a pretty decent rate, gives him an edge over just about everyone in a lot of situations. Because the way that this game evaluates the army loss penalty, basically adjudicating when you've won or lost a battle, it comes down to the value of all of your units remaining versus the value of all of the enemy units remaining. And a lot of people don't take this into consideration, but archers, as they use up their ammo, they lose their balance of power. It's essentially as if you're killing off their units. If their shots are being fired and wasted, this is why in a lot of my battles you'll often see me go out ahead of the army and try to waste the enemy ammo of the archers, because what I'm doing there is I'm wasting their balance of power and weakening the enemy. And what that does is it gets it closer to being where the game will just adjudicate you a win, so you basically win without as many casualties. Now, in the High Elf situation, if they go up against too many enemies, you'll just simply run out of ammo, and you'll end up losing the battle, the army loss penalty get inflicted on you, before you've really taken that many casualties, because the value of the ammunition is so high. So getting the ability to regenerate your ammo is more or less equivalent to having like hit point regeneration for all of your units in your army. Assuming you've got an archer based army. Obviously this is pretty useless if you're going to go with a Swordmaster of Hoeth spam, which I don't know why anyone would do that. But yeah, very, very powerful ability, because it also affects artillery as well. So you can give it to Eagle Claw bolt throwers, essentially sit back, relax, and just watch as they basically obliterate a settlement, no problem. Eltharion has pretty much no trouble taking on any settlement, with the exception of Skaven settlements, just because the menace below will come up and attack your artillery. And I've had that experience as well, and it's very annoying. But everyone knows that Skaven are the most annoying faction to deal with, especially, well, for everyone, really. Anyway, he's also providing Grim Discipline for everyone in his army, which, again, is pretty useful, but if you're going to go with an archer-based army, they probably won't be making that much use out of it. But if you don't want to go with an archer-based army, that's still very good. I mean, Grim Discipline is better than Martial Mastery. He's also got Dedication to Ladriel, but that's only really effective if you're playing as Yvrest, because that only affects Mistwalkers. So, can't really rate him too highly on that, but really, Break Upon the Walls and Grim Discipline is enough to get him the 10 out of 10 by far, because those are two very powerful abilities there. Now, as for faction power, this is where Eltharion falls a bit short. He doesn't really do much. He's only going to get a 4 out of 10, because Wall Warden, it reduces the construction cost and construction time for wall and garrison buildings, but I don't value these buildings very highly anyway, because I think that High Elf walls are, for one thing, mostly unnecessary, except for on the frontiers. The way I usually play my High Elf campaigns is that I build walls on the frontier, and then as the frontier expands, I demolish the walls that were behind us, because honestly, the garrisons inside of the walls from that building, not particularly good. You're not going to get elite units. It's mostly just going to be some basic archer units. It'll help against like an easy stack, but on legendary difficulty, that's usually not the case. That gets sent at you. So I don't value it that highly, but some people would. And he also gets Unyielding March, which gives him campaign movement range, which doesn't affect his faction rating. It's more of his command ability. But also gives him +2 global recruitment capacity, which is especially useful in conjunction with the fact that High Elves can recruit a lot of their units in a single turn. So it's very effective to have that, but it's not enough for him to get really any higher than a 4 out of 10. So that's his sort of rating for that. Overall, he's going to get an 8 out of 10, making him a very good lord, but he just doesn't have that much to really boost the faction as a whole, but he's an amazing commander. Coming in at number 4 is Imrik of Caledor. So Imrik is one of the biggest dick commanders in the game. Now, when I say biggest dick, I'm not just talking about the size of his schlong, I'm also talking that he's a bit of a douche. His dragon mount, Menaithnir, is arguably the best dragon mount in the game. If you compare the size of Menaithnir to a regular star dragon, Menaithnir really does seem a lot bigger than it. So this is a massive goddamn dragon. So he's got the best dragon mount in the game, so, battle power is obviously going to be 10 out of 10, because he's on a dragon, and it's the best dragon in the game, and he can boost his abilities by a lot, which I'll go into now. Armor of Caledor, giving you extra regen, up to 3,000 hit points, ward save, armor, vigor loss reduction, all really good. He's got Dragon Pact over here, which will give you 4 free casts of Piercing Bolts of Burning, which is not the best spell in the Fire lore, which would have been Flamestorm, but this is still a pretty good spell that could net you 100 or 200 kills in any particular battle, and it's free. There's nothing wrong with free. You got Blazing Lance over here, which will cause flammable effect. So Menaithnir being a dragon is going to cause flaming attack, so that'll help going up against things that have flame resistance to help to weaken that. And then you've got Ashen Fields on top of that, which is going to give him weapon strength and also reduce fire resistance even further for local enemy armies. So yeah, 10 out of 10 battle combatant. As for command power, he is also going to get a 10 out of 10 because he boosts dragons like nobody else does. So Dragon Kin will give you campaign movement range and Draconic Resilience, immunity to some attrition, which is useful for a star position, and reduce upkeep for dragons and dragon princes. Now, I'm not going to be mentioning much on dragon princes because dragon princes suck, and I don't ever recruit them. They're tier 5 unit that belong at tier 3, in my opinion, at least at legendary difficulty. But if you want to get dragon princes, go for it. In my opinion, go dragons over dragon princes. Way better unit. Anyway, so in all the ways that he boosts them as well, you've got Vol's Armaments, so that'll give extra magic resistance and armor for dragons. Dragons have a very high tendency of getting shot because they're so big. That's sometimes the size of a unit can actually be its weakness, and guns and any kind of archer unit basically see dragons as an easy target. So having a bit of extra armor is going to be useful, at least the stuff that aren't like armor-piercing bullets. So be very careful around guns with your dragon army. And then you've also got physical resistance for dragons and an extra 6 melee defense. Now, unless they're using magic bullets, which, by the way, they would have been resistant here, that physical resistance I've recently learned does actually apply to missile resistance. So if you've got 10% on here and 15% magic resistance, you've essentially got a minimum of 10% ward save for your dragon units. So it is pretty useful to be able to resist 10%, minimum 10% of all damage, excluding armor and that kind of stuff. You've also, again, got the Ashen Field. So if you're going with dragon spam, dragons tend to cause fire damage. That's going to weaken them a fair bit, really boosting a lot of dragons. Now, one thing I want to mention with this, and I've heard it said that some people were experimenting using wizards, fire wizards specifically, with the incendiary trait on sun dragons in Imrik's army. Now, I don't recommend doing that because even though it's on a dragon, they're not classified as dragons, so you're not going to get the 25% reduced upkeep for those dragons, for the mages on dragons. They're not going to get the 10% physical resistance and 6 melee defense. They'll still get the magic resistance, because that applies to the Lord's army, but they won't get the things because they're not classified as dragons. So just be wary of that. I'm not saying don't do that, but don't do that with Imrik. As for Imrik, just give him regular star dragons or whatever kind of dragon you want. That's what I would recommend. As for having somebody on the ground, because you can't just have all flyers, highly recommended getting a life wizard, because dragons, they tend to take damage. Having somebody heal them when you've got Earth Blood, which will regenerate health, and also Regrowth, which will regenerate health and also their fatigue, is quite effective. Can boost the dragons by quite a lot. Now, as for his faction power, Imrik is going to get a 5 out of 10. He doesn't do a lot. He does a little bit more than Eltharion, but not by a lot. So Caledor Incumbent is very useful at the beginning of a campaign. Influence +2 per turn. There's no downside to that. Hero Recruitment Noble or Provinces, that's quite useful. Hero Capacity for Nobles +3, also very useful. You really want to get a bunch of Nobles as early as possible because that'll help you generate more influence. So that will have a pretty long-lasting effect throughout the campaign if you can get that fairly early and get them going and securing influence. Nobles are very good heroes. You've also got Vol's Armament over here, which will provide extra research rate, which for the High Elves is not that useful because High Elves, you can actually cheese the research system quite easily because every prince and princess has the Elven Scholar skill tree over here. So what you can end up doing is when you're able to recruit your lords at say around rank 10, you could just recruit a new lord every turn, put in 3 points into Elven Scholar, that's why you got to be at least rank 10, and then disband them, and even disbanded lords will still apply that extra 15% research rate. So I've easily had up to 1,000% research rate fairly, into the mid game with the High Elves. You can get through their tech tree very quickly if you do it. So that 10% will seem like not much in the grand scheme of things if you decide to do that, but at the beginning of the campaign it's not bad. So overall, Imrik's going to get an 8.3 out of 10, 10 out of 10 battle combatant, 10 out of 10 command power, 5 out of 10 faction power, leading him to 8.3 out of 10. Coming in at number 3 is Alith Anar. So this guy here is the first High Elf Legendary Lord that's not going to get a 10 out of 10 for battle combatant. He's only going to get 8 out of 10. When I look at his skill tree here, it is good, but compared to the guys that came before him, this is not where his strength lies. He's certainly able to inflict some casualties in the battle, in any battle, because he's got a very long range missile attack. He's pretty decent at hitting large targets. I wouldn't have him try to hit small targets, especially if they're moving on elevations. He's very accurate, and that can actually be a disadvantage because the accuracy doesn't take into consideration elevation. So anyone that's moving down a hill, he's basically guaranteed to miss. I suppose the best thing about Alith Anar when it comes down to applying value on the battlefield is his mislead ability, which eventually becomes called of Shadow Dancer, allowing him to create a doppelganger, which you can use as a tank for a few seconds. That is very useful. But when comparing him to other kinds of tanks, he himself is not amazing in melee. He's able to get a few kills. He's okay. He doesn't have any laws of magic. There's just not really much in there to warrant any higher score than 8 out of 10. Good archer. Very useful in sieges, quite accurate, able to get good kills, but there's nothing amazing about him. So let's move on to his command power. 8 out of 10 is what I'm going to give it. If we look at Raven Lord, which is his skill, he can reduce the upkeep cost for Shadow Walkers and Shadow Warriors, and also provide ambush success chance. Now that's especially useful when he's part of Nagaryth. But if we were to take him out of Nagaryth and say put him into Avalon or Attain or Yvres or whatever, Shadow Walkers are good, but you can't recruit them. Shadow Warriors are good-ish. They're not as good as Sisters of Avalon, but once you apply that bonus and also Ruthless, which will boost them a bit further, then they start to become maybe a bit on par with sort of baseline Sisters of Avalon. So the amount that he can boost Shadow Warriors and Shadow Walkers is pretty good, but it's not enough to warrant him a 10 out of 10 as a commander. Still good though. Where Alith Anar really shines is his faction power. He's going to get a 10 out of 10. And it really does boil down to two things. Renegade over here, which will provide missile strength for all armies faction-wide plus 12%. I don't even care about that -8 diplomatic relations with the High Elves. That's irrelevant by comparison. And then he's also got Shadow King over here, +4 public order, all provinces. Essentially these 3 skills here are, because there's 2 points into this, is extremely useful, especially this one here, because, extra 12% missile damage for pretty much every single one of your armies, when you focus on missile damage, is extremely useful. So he's boosting everybody in your faction, except for Imrik, who's just using dragons, essentially. So really, really useful to just have in the faction. Even if you don't want to give him an army, what you can do is just level him up, get him to this point, and then just have everyone else command armies. But he's still good enough that I would still use him. Just give him Shadow Warriors, and it's fine. He's got some okay okay items here. The moonbow is pretty good, but the thing that I don't like about it is that it's actually super easy to dodge it, and the AI is actually, even unintentionally dodging it, they do manage, it manages to miss a fair bit, I find. So you got to make sure you really hit the right target, because if you hit the wrong target and it just shoots right past them, it is very disappointing to watch that, because he's supposed to be super accurate. It doesn't really have that much of a homing ability, so you got to be very careful with it. So yeah. 8 out of 10 for battle power, 8 out of 10 for command power, 10 out of 10 for faction power, overall giving him a total score of 8.6. A really powerful legendary lord, highly valuable, and ranked number 3 out of the high elves. Let's move on to the number 2 guy. Coming in at number 2 is the guy that everyone thought would get the number 1 slot. It's Tyrion. So Tyrion is one of the best legendary lords in the game, period, but he is the second best high elf legendary lord. So in terms of battle power, of course he's going to get a 10 out of 10. This dude is an absolute beast in melee, especially considering he doesn't get a very powerful mount. He's still incredibly strong. So looking at all of his like stats, what makes him so strong? It really comes down to having extremely high base stats, like 75 melee attack is really good, a lot of armor piercing damage, but the dragon armor of Anarion and the Heart of Avalon provide him with a ton of resistances, making him very difficult to actually inflict damage to. Which is why if you've ever gone up against Tyrion, he can be a real pain to get rid of, especially in melee. You basically just want to line up all of your guns, net of Ammontok him or something, and just shoot him as quickly as you can, because he's such a pain in the ass. He can kill your legendary lords very quickly. So the Heart of Avalon here, when he is getting low on health, he can pop down some extra healing just once in a battle to get 1,872 extra health, which is especially useful if you're playing on smaller unit scales, because that will sort of scale a bit higher for you. So yeah, very strong items here. And then he's got the Sunfang over here, which is that item there will actually apply more to faction power, but still provide some really good extra strength. Sunfang ability, the breath attack, is very strong. You can do it essentially as many times as you want, but he has to be engaged in melee to recharge, sort of like the Sword of Cain, which I'll get onto that a little bit. I feel like I should mention that with Tyrion, because it'll often get asked. And the next thing to talk about is his mount. Now, normally, if a lord or a hero only has a horse mount, you would just leave them on foot. Horses are shit in Warhammer 2, okay? Because you have to think about it aside from just stats. But in the case of Tyrion, it is actually worth getting the horse, but I'll just explain why horses are shit in general. So, your dude's on foot, he's a small entity. Now, while he's a small unit, and while he's on foot, only say 4 or 5 units can attack him at a time. So that minimizes the amount of damage. Even if he's in a blob of like 100,000 troops all around him, I'm being ridiculous obviously, only a few units can attack him at any given time. Also, if he's in melee, it's very hard for archers and gunners to shoot at him, because it's just too small. And missile units in this game will really try to avoid friendly fire, even Skaven. So when he's in melee on foot, it's very difficult for the archers to hit him. But when he's on horseback, he's a little bit taller, he's bigger, so more entities can hit him, and units can actually shoot him, so it's a little bit of a weakness. But because he's such a strong melee combatant, you basically want to get that extra speed so that you can get towards the enemy lord and snipe them as much as possible, or use him to waste enemy ammo. And because he's so strong, even with the disadvantages of having a horse, it sort of it's made up for by the fact that he's just so damn good in melee and has so many resistances. But in the situations of sieges, I would take his horse off, because you don't really need it during a siege. I usually don't bother, but he is technically better on foot. Now, as for Bloodline of Anarion, he's a 10 out of 10 melee combatant even without this, but I should mention that it is there, but you shouldn't get it, because it is mutually exclusive with Majesty of Ulthuan, and Majesty of Ulthuan is just way better than Bloodline of Anarion. You'd only go down this line if you're just basically having a sort of Tyrion is a dick meme campaign, which I've done before, and it can be fun. But if you're actually playing to win, Majesty of Ulthuan is a lot better. So when you add up all of these items, Tyrion, yeah, gets a 10 out of 10. He's very, very strong. It may not look like he's super strong, but yeah, he can take on just about anyone in melee. Now, as for his command ability, this is where he fell a little bit short. He's only an 8 out of 10. So looking at Great Warrior, which is pretty much the only thing that he has in this sort of skill, he reduces the upkeep cost for Spearmen, Silver and Guard, Rangers, Archers, and Silver Helm units. So that's particularly useful in the beginning of the campaign, but none of these units are late game units. So you wouldn't be having any of these in your Doom stacks, like you would. It doesn't boost Sisters of Avalon or Dragons or anything that's particularly high tier. I mean, Silver and Guard are tier 3, but I still don't personally use them. I mean, it just depends on the army that you want to get. And also, for the High Elves, when you reach the late campaign, having reduced upkeep costs on your armies becomes kind of irrelevant when you're making like 100,000 gold per turn profit. So it's not that big of a deal, but it is very useful at the beginning of the campaign to get a good start. So he definitely deserves a few points for that. Now, even though this is more of a faction-wide ability, Righteous Cause will reduce his upkeep cost by an additional 10%. So I feel like I should give him a few points into command power because of that, even though it does provide faction-wide power. So he's going to get in total an 8 out of 10. There's nothing else in here that boosts the stats of his army, so there's just nothing that sets his army apart from anybody else's, so he can't get full points for that. Now, as for faction power, Tyrion is going to get a 10 out of 10, because this is assuming that you go down the Majesty of Ulthuan line. If you go down the Bloodline of Venerian, he doesn't get 10 out of 10, which is why you shouldn't go down it. So, Majesty of Ulthuan, this skill itself is not that important, but it unlocks these ones here. Unifier, +1 public order, all provinces. Diplomatic relations with High Elves, especially useful because you want to get confederations, and confederations require you to have good relations with High Elves. They will not confederate with you if they hate you. There's also income from local buildings, but whatever. Reduced recruitment cost, -10%, all armies. Pretty useful, but not essential. Global recruitment duration, -1 for all units. Very useful. Global recruitment capacity, +2. Again, extremely useful. Righteous Cause, again, we've already covered this one, but reduced upkeep for all units, all armies. So, again, very useful. And where he gets the additional points is Sunfang over here for public order +3 all provinces. Adding that as 4 public order points. I remember in a previous video, in my top 5 legendary lords, I think I said this. I said, yeah, he gets 1 + 3, so it ends up being 2 or something ridiculous, but I just misspoke. But yeah, he gets 4 public order, all provinces, and reduce upkeep costs, extra global recruit capacity, reduced time. That's all really, really useful. That's why he's going to get a 10 out of 10. So overall, Tyrion is going to get a 9.3 out of 10 because he just falls a little bit short on command power. That's about it. But apart from that, an extremely powerful and valuable legendary lord, which if you're not playing as Attain, you should try to confederate Tyrion. He's very difficult to confederate, but it's worth getting him. So don't wipe him out. Don't attack him to try to weaken him, because he'll never confederate with you and he'll never accept a peace treaty with you if he hates you, and he will hate you if you go to war with him. He's a difficult dude to deal with. Anyway, let's move on now to the number 1 slot. Taking the number 1 spot is Alarielle the Radiant. Now, Alarielle's not only the best High Elf legendary lord, but she might actually be one of the best legendary lords in the game, period. She's the first legendary lord that I've evaluated, and she's getting a perfect score of 10 out of 10 in all 3 categories. So let's firstly evaluate her battle power, which of course 10 out of 10. So I'm going to be comparing her a bit with Teclis because she's pretty closely categorized with him. So Teclis gets a Arcane Phoenix mount, and Alarielle gets a Great Eagle. So in terms of melee capabilities, Teclis is actually a little bit better in that regard, actually quite a bit better. And in terms of spellcasting as well, Teclis definitely does dish out more damage. He's got more Winds of Magic, and with most of his spells, he's going to be spellcasting a lot cheaper. So how does Alarielle then qualify as a 10 out of 10, which is the same as Teclis? Well, apart from the fact that Alarielle should never really be going up against Teclis, they are different categories of spellcasters. Teclis is definitely like a damage-dealing priority spellcaster because of Chain Lightning and his other fireball spells, that kind of stuff. He's actually good at really dishing out a lot of damage, whereas Alarielle, her primarily use is for healing. Now, that's not to say that she can't dish out any damage at all. She's got Banishment, which is a good spell for dishing out damage in the Law of Light, but her primary role is healing. So if we have a look at Earthblight, she doesn't get regrowth in her later skill tree, which she doesn't really need, but she's got Earthblood, which is usually the one that I go for because it's cheap. But she's also got another type of healing, so she's got the Star of Avalon, and this really is here, the crux of where she's able to provide value. So restoring up to 1080 hit points up to twice per battle. This is really good at healing your hero units. Now, Alarielle's army should be archer-based, and what's going to complement the most with some archers is having some heroes which are used to basically act as crowd control, you know, when using checkerboard formation or whatever. So the heroes that I like to use are handmaidens. She should definitely have at least one handmaiden, at least one noble, or putting 2 nobles, or having one noble and a Lawmaster of Herwith. Not too many heroes, maybe 3 or 4. And then being able to heal them and keep them nice and healthy throughout the battle with Earthblood and Star of Avalon. That's just super valuable, while also being able to, of course, cast Banishment. Now, with Alarielle's army, I usually put in another spellcaster with her as well, another Law of Light for the Net of Amatok, and that also helps to generate more Winds of Magic, depending on which law you want to use. Alarielle does have a lot of Winds of Magic, and she's got essentially 2 or 3 Arcane Conduits, 2 I think. She's got Arcane Conduit, and she's also got the Banner of Avalon, which you can use to generate more Winds of Magic as well, and the Staff of Avalon as well, which you can only use once, but still lots of Winds of Magic. So that's why she's going to get a 10 out of 10. She's just an excellent healer. So she's not actually the one dishing out damage necessarily. Not to say that she can't, but she's not the one dishing out damage, but she's assisting other people to dish out damage by just having them live, which is extremely valuable. You don't want your heroes dying. So the next point is command power. Her best units are Sisters of Avalon, and I'm not saying that you need to spam them. I do, but I'm not saying that you need to. But she's got Spiritual Defender here, which provides melee defense for Sisters of Avalon units in local army. This is very similar to Morathi, what she does with Shades. Now, melee defense is arguably the most important stat for Sisters of Avalon when dealing with melee, because you want them to hold as long as possible so that the other sisters and archers can keep shooting, assuming you're using like a checkerboard formation. So sisters tend to have very high... Their melee defense is so high. They've actually got higher melee defense than like Phoenix Guard. They're very good at defending themselves. I've actually seen Sisters of Avalon withhold a unit of Demigryph Knights, full-strength Demigryph Knights, charged at them, and the Sisters of Avalon brushed it off like it was nothing. And that wasn't even Alarielle's army, so on top of this, makes it even stronger. So that's definitely where she's getting the majority of her points. And she's also got the Radiant skill, which provides missile strength plus 15% for Sisters of Avalon's and Handmaiden units for her Lord's army, making them obviously a lot more damage dealing. So Sisters of Avalon are, in my opinion, one of the best high elf units, and nobody upgrades the Sisters of Avalon more than Alarielle, with the exception of maybe Eltharion, because he gets essentially unlimited ammo with them. But then again, he got a 10 out of 10 command skill as well. So let's now move on to the faction power, and this is probably where she's going to get the most skills, what she provides the most for the faction. So in terms of going down Tradition Dictates or Blood and Fire, I highly recommend going down Tradition Dictates, because obviously otherwise you miss out on this. This is what you want to get if you want to go down the... if you want to play as Avalon and recruit the Forest Spirits, like if you want to get tree men, then this would be useful, and that way you could really boost them with Earthblood. But that's not what I recommend. You can do that, but it's not what I recommend. And if you're playing with any other faction where you can't recruit those tree units, definitely don't get Blood and Fire. You don't need that reduced upkeep cost. But the extra 2 public order and extra tax rate, that tax rate will make you thousands upon thousands of gold per turn if you play your cards right and get Entrepreneur, Wizards, and Handmaidens. That'll provide you with tons of money. Easily 5% will pay for her own army. You've also got Leader of the Court here, which will give you extra relations with High Elves, super useful. Servants of Isha, being able to increase the hero capacity for Handmaidens and also hero recruit rank for Handmaidens, very useful. And then this one over here, recruitment duration -1 turn for Sisters of Avalon, all provinces. Now, with the exception of Etain, because Etain's faction ability reduces recruitment time for all infantry units by 1 turn, every other high elf faction takes 2 turns to recruit a unit of Sisters of Avalon, unless you get Alarielle. Once you get Alarielle, being able to recruit them in 1 turn means that these can be a unit that you can recruit in an emergency, and it basically halves the amount of time recruiting, which also means that the army can get into combat faster and kind of cheaper. You're still paying for half the units while you're recruiting them, because they're just sitting there waiting for you to finish. So that is really, really important there. And so when you add up all of those bonuses there, that's why she's getting a 10 out of 10. So she's not necessarily the best at being battle power, commander, or faction power, but she's so good in all 3 categories that she's going to get a 10 out of 10. So she's really, really versatile. If you level her up completely correctly, she'll boost your entire faction by a ton. And there's one other thing that we need to mention, which is extremely important, and that's her ability to provide presence in a local region. Power of nature. So whenever she stays in a region, and this isn't unique to Avalon, this is if you get her, you get this ability. She stays in a region for a turn, and this will get applied. So 1 extra influence per turn, public order +3, winds of magic power reserve, local armies, growth +10, untainted. So what you can do with Alarielle, especially in the early game, is have her basically doing a tour of Ulthuan, where she just spends 1 turn in a region, and then moves on to a different region, providing this effect. So you can have essentially, in a province that has 3 regions, you can have this effect multiplied by 3, giving you 3 influence, 9 public order, 30 winds. I'm not sure about 30 winds of magic, it's only for the region, but the extra growth and untainted, super useful for growing up your provinces in the early game, and that needs to be taken into account. That's so important, and it's really good late game as well, for conquering new regions and just getting them up to scratch, and so they don't have revolts. Not that High Elves have too many revolts in the late game, but she just adds a little bit on top of that. So yeah, that's why she's getting 10 out of 10. She's definitely one of the best legendary lords in the game, but you need to be able to level her up correctly. It's very easy to get her wrong. That's the legendary lord comparison for the High Elves. Let me know what you think, whether you agree or disagree, and also let me know which race you want me to cover next. Appreciate all the support. Don't forget to leave a sub, and I'll see you next time, fuckers.